Greetings, my name's Jonathan Nichol. I'd first like to thank Nathan Nab for setting up these wonderful online master classes that we've been having for the past month and a half now. It's just a tremendous resource for saxophonists all across the world to share information and share ideas and gather knowledge together. And I think it's one of the most engaging, most engaging new projects that we've had in a long time. So I'm just thrilled to be a part of this and happy to share some ideas with you today about jazz music. So thank you, Nathan Nab, for starting this. I'd first like to share a little bit about my background as a saxophonist with you all. And I had the fortunate privilege of learning and growing in a household with a saxophone professor. My father, John Nichol, is a professor of saxophone at Central Michigan University. And he started teaching me music from a very early age, playing piano, learning saxophone, and being exposed to all different kinds of music. And when I was a teenager, he introduced me to jazz music and specifically the music of Duke Ellington. And I remember there was one day where we went to the record store and bought Duke Ellington's 16 most requested songs, went home, listened to the whole thing. And I heard Johnny Hodges playing Prelude to a Kiss, and I was kind of hooked on jazz music and saxophone music from that point on. So my study, or my collegiate study, has all been in saxophone performance, classical saxophone performance, a music education undergraduate degree, and a master's and a doctorate in saxophone performance from Michigan State University. So I learned how to play jazz through vocational training, and it was playing a lot of gigging. I was doing a lot of gigging, playing a lot of, doing a lot of transcriptions, uh, just working to learn how to play the music through the act of doing so. And I made sure that when I was developing jazz skills, I listened every day, I practiced every day, and I improvised every day. And I tried to find things that I liked and assimilated all of them. And I think that's a really important aspect of learning and knowledge for all of us. Uh, that when we find something that we're interested in, we take an in depth look at the artist, the music, the art, whatever it might be, and say, why do I like it? What is excellent about it? Can I model it? Can I use it to inform the art that I'm creating? I did that with the music of Duke Ellington, with the music of Clifford Brown, with the music of John Coltrane. And it was how I, taught myself and used guidance from my father and my jazz teachers to learn jazz music. And another just like formative aspect of my own education is I would cut grass and take every $20 and use that to buy a jazz record at our local warehouse record store. And I thank my mother and my father both for just buying a tremendous amount of records for me to listen to. And we're privileged now that we have Spotify and Tidal and all these on YouTube and all these online streaming services. But listening is so important. So I shared a handout that I created in the discussion area of this Facebook event, and I'd like to go through it a little bit now. And the first category that I included when I thought about creating a strategy for a classical saxophonist to study jazz music is to talk a little bit about listening. And I often, talk to my students about learning French, is that if we got a textbook, what we would be able to do is learn how to read French and learn how to write French, but I think it would be really tricky to speak a different language without hearing that language. So as you're embarking on a journey to study jazz music or improve your jazz skills, adding a component of daily listening is, I think, one of the most beneficial things that you can do, so you start to develop a tonal image in your mind of what jazz sounds like, of what you think the music is like. Can you recreate a recording in your mind? And can you really build that sound model of, let's say, Charlie Parker or John Coltrane or Dexter Gordon or some of those people? And I worry that with the accessibility to modern listening, that we keep it too often in the background. And I think there's basically three different kinds of listening that we engage. One is that background listening where we have music on while we're cooking, we have music on while we're driving, or while we're cleaning or studying or doing some sort of activity, and it's that sound that's in the background, it's peripheral, we're not engaging it. A more impactful kind of listening is engaged listening, where we sit down and we listen for enjoyment and entertainment, because it's fun, because we feel emotion from the music. And then for us as students of music, I think it's so very, very important that we spend some time with some critical and some analytical listening experiences where we're asking why, how, what, and really starting to do some analysis. So in the handout that I created for you all today, I have some guided listening questions. And I kind of created these questions from the saxophonist viewpoint. And I think we should be asking, how does that player manipulate timbre? You know, does the sound airy? Is it a little bit more of a spread sound? Is it a more focused sound? You know, how can we associate what the jazz musician is doing to what we're doing as a classical saxophonist? How is the saxophonist using vibrato on sustained notes? You know, I think that there's a tradition of jazz vibrato where the note has a bit of sustain, and then the vibrato beautifies the note towards the end of the note. Is the vibrato slower or faster? Thinking about how musicians manipulate time. You know, if you listen to Sonny Rollins play, there'll be some time phasing where he moves ahead of the beat or behind the beat. I think it's important to assess how long phrases are. How does range and tessitura vary throughout an improvisation? How much is the musician manipulating the melody when they're playing? Is the jazz improvisation using motives? You know, there's a very, very famous solo by Sonny Rollins on the tune Blue 7 from the Saxophonal Colossus album, and Gunther Schuller wrote an article about how Sonny Rollins used motivic development throughout that entire solo in a brilliant way. So that's maybe an article for you all to reference as well. And I think a really good challenge for us is to take a lead sheet, put on a recording, listen to the solo, and say, hey, can I hear the changes through what the solo player is playing, or through the solo lines and the melodic lines? And that's a good ear training exercise as well. And then I think maybe some final questions are, you know, what do I like about a track? How does it excite me? You know, what are the things that I gravitate towards? What kinds of music? And I think that's one of the beauties of studying jazz music is there's so many subsets of genres that we can find something that's really interesting for each of us and find a way to like personally connect to the music. And that's one thing I appreciate about working with students studying jazz is they're constantly teaching me new players, new kinds of music, new genres of jazz. And an example of that is I had my own students at Oklahoma share the music of Ben Wendell with me, and I've really enjoyed getting to know his playing and his compositions. So in the handout that I created for you, I've selected some of my favorite albums that I think are wonderful for modeling sound and using as a departure point for saying, I would like to sound like this, because the saxophonists are playing in tune, in time, in tone. They manipulate timbre exceedingly well on those lists of albums. And one that I'd like to highlight is Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm section. And I was actually introduced to this album by Donald Cinta. And as I was applying for schools years ago, I took a lesson, and he ended up telling me the story about how the album was recorded right after Art Pepper got out of jail, and the Miles Davis rhythm section was in town, and his wife set up the recording session. And so I always like to have that album identified with an experience with a master saxophone pedagogue, and you know, one of the greatest in the business that we've had. So that's what I would encourage you to do is, you know, to take an album a day or take 2 albums a week and just start going through some of these records and finding the questions that you use yourself to help guide you for studying jazz and learning jazz and learning the aesthetic of what the saxophonists are doing. Another point that a student of mine, Ben McDonald, made when I was planning this talk is he suggested to include that we go and hear live jazz music. I believe most communities have a restaurant, a venue, or at least maybe more urban communities have places that have live jazz. It's important for us to go out and support the musicians that are playing, support the venues that are having jazz, and especially as we get past this COVID-19 crisis and we try as a country to return to normalcy, supporting live music is, going to be an absolute must for all of us, so that we have places to play and that we have people to listen to us when we're trying to create art. I was privileged to grow up in Michigan with the Detroit Jazz Festival. I remember hearing James Moody play at the Detroit Jazz Festival, Michael Brecker play at the Detroit Jazz Festival, Count Basie Big Band, all of these great musicians. And so find jazz festivals in your state, find venues in your state. If you get to Chicago, go to the Jazz Showcase. If you get to New York, go to the Vanguard, go to the Blue Note, go to all of these famous and iconic clubs. And regardless of who's playing, you'll learn something and go as you go and listen. So that's just an important part of celebrating and performing art, is engaging the art as a listener and hearing it live. So the next thing I'd like to talk about are some differences in sound production from playing classical saxophone to jazz saxophone. And I think the largest difference is how we use pressure with our bottom jaw. And, a really wonderful classical saxophone embouchure, if we refer to it through the Larry Teal system, has good ooh, corners in, firm jaw without a bitten jaw, and some nice muscle support. That's a wonderful embouchure for creating a focused, sustained, stable sound, and a beautiful sound and a round sound. But sometimes if we get a little bit more bottom jaw flexibility, that allows the reed to vibrate a little bit freer, and we can end up having so many different timbres that we can bring into our playing. And I was watching myself play jazz the other day in a mirror, and I said, man, I've really got to give you a lesson, Jonathan. Your bottom jaw is moving all over the place. But then as I asked myself why I'm doing that, it's to create different sounds, different timbres, more of a ghosted open low end, or, a richer resonant high end to the sound. So I included a couple of practice strategies that you can employ. One is just simply sustaining like a mid-tube note, like an octave F sharp's always a great way to play. And then pull your bottom jaw down as far as you can with keeping your lip and your embouchure taut, to see if you can keep sound sustained and as close to being in tune as you can. That jaw flexibility is really important for timbral variance. And the pitch is going to dip a bit, but it's working on keeping lip muscles stable, and jaw flexibility combined with that is essential to jazz sound. Another aspect of working on jazz embouchure is to try a double lip embouchure, and that creates a little bit more space between your back molars. It doesn't allow you to bite. Now, I don't advocate to play with the double lip embouchure, but it's a good strategy to get a bit more flexibility just in the pressures that you're using with embouchure. And then another fun strategy is to take your top teeth actually off of the mouthpiece and see if you can produce tone. And I think as you experiment with those three things, you'll start to see how manipulation and different sorts of vertical pressures and embouchure pressures change the sound that you're playing. Playing jazz music, you should also have like an open throat feel. I think Phil Woods is one of the best saxophonists or alto saxophonists that I've heard that really demonstrates what open throat feels like. So I suggest listening to him for that. And then also trying to play with wider air column is a really great strategy to open sound and play with a bigger sound. And maybe the final physical thing that you can try to get more of an idiomatic jazz timbre is actually pushing the mouthpiece in and blowing open and blowing the pitch down. And now I might not advocate playing this way, but it's a great way to pull bite out of the sound, to open the throat and get a bigger sound, and just to pull some more of that jazz timbre in. And I think it's really important for us to remember that these jazz saxophonists that were playing in the 1940s, 1950s, and 60s were creating sound that needed to project over a drum set and a rhythm section. So it's a bigger sound, it's a full sound, it's a rich sound, and it's a very projected sound. So some things that we do with relaxing tension at our jaw, relaxing tension with our throat, blowing big, blowing wide are really important. So now I'll move on to some practical aspects of jazz study. And I called this next section Building Vocabulary. And this is my attempt, at least in a one lecture online forum, to say how do we answer the question of what we play. And the foundation of music is scale study. And I think when you're working on your scales, you're both building technique, building sound, building ear training, working on intonation, and developing both your classical skill set and your jazz skill set. And it's a way to simultaneously improve just your skill as playing a saxophone, skill as a saxophonist, while working on classical music and jazz music. So I'd say know all of your major scales, your minor scales, arpeggios, modes, diminished scales, whole tone scales, and blues scales. And if you don't know all of those, the summer is a great time to get started on them. There will only be benefits that come from learning your scales very, very well. To work on jazz style with the scales, you can add displaced or upbeat slur to articulations. So, you start with an articulation, then you're slurring to starting on upbeats. And you can find that information many places online, but adding those jazz slurrings in are very important. And then I made a note on the handout that articulation, accent, and rhythm placement determine swing feel rather than eighth notes turned into the swing triplets idea. When you get like a jazz big band chart, you sometimes see that it's 2 eighth notes equal quarter note eighth triplet. I think sometimes that's a bit of a misidentification of what swing feels like. I believe that musical texture, accent, placement, ghosting, sound variants, how you're playing against the beat, do a ton more for creating swing feel than just simply manipulating rhythm. Just please work on scales, to start building vocabulary. Patterns help us determine what to play as well. A simple pattern is just taking the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, and 5 and playing that in all 12 keys. So it would be like C, D, E, G, and then maybe perhaps you move to the key of G, G, A, B, D, and transmitting that pattern throughout all 12 keys. In the resources section of my handout, I have patterns for jazz listed. That book's fabulous, phenomenal, wonderful. I think a must-own for every saxophonist's library. And it's abundant with patterns and different things to use. But why I suggest working on that 1, 2, 3 pattern is it's a great way to have a concrete practice strategy or a concrete item to practice when you're working on jazz vocabulary. This helps you bridge and easily move between chords, and it will help you build technique with a mixture of linear and non-linear motion. And I think that's really important. Also, is just the combining of arpeggios and leaps into diatonic scale motion helps us to build that jazz vocabulary. I'm reminded right now of a encounter I had with Joey DiFrancesco actually at our university last year, and we were going to play a couple of tunes with him with the band that I play with called Boyd Street Brass, and we handed him a few lead sheets, and he looked at us like we were crazy, and he said, you guys, I just really don't even read music anymore. And here's one of the world's most fantastic improvisers and wonderful musicians saying that he no longer reads music. Well, I mean, what kind of lesson for us is that? And I think it's that we are so accustomed to playing music with our eyes first and our ears second that I think at some point we have to switch that around and start playing music with our ears first and, use the eyes to guide the ear rather than or the ears to guide the eye rather than the eye to guide the ears. I hope that's clear, that concept is clear. And that's where transcribing is super important for us. Now, here's another thought for you all. Western music may be the only genre or subset of music that is totally relying upon written sheet music. When you think about pop music or more world musics, even though there are systems or different systems of notation, a lot of it's performed without sheet music. And I think transcribing is a great way to get us off the written page and get us more active using our ear. And I think it's a must-do activity that helps teach us jazz style. Uh, when we're working on a classical saxophone piece, it's easy to see a crescendo, a diminuendo on the page, some expression markings, some articulation markings. Oftentimes, we're relying upon ourselves to come up with that information as the jazz player. So if we cannot hear it in our mind's ear, I think it's really, really hard for us to transmit it from the instrument. Um, so what I would say is find something that you like, that inspires you, that is simple. The other night I listened back to the first recording of Watermelon Man by Herbie Hancock, and Dexter Gordon plays a great motivic solo on that track. And it's simple, it's logical, it works. It's something that you could probably transcribe in 30, 40 minutes. There's not a huge time buy-in for it. So I would really encourage you as that is a place to start just for working on transcribing. And I think you'll feel really good being funky with Herbie Hancock and Dexter Gordon. And, you know, I don't know why things pop into my mind sometimes, but I think about that scene in Tommy Boy, of course, where it's, you know, it's not John Hancock, it's Herbie Hancock. So he's really famous, right? But anyhow, that's too much of a digression. When you're starting to transcribe, don't feel like you have to do the whole solo. You can start with a lick, you can start with a phrase, you can start with a measure, just so you engage in doing some of the transcribing. And I think sometimes transcribing is such a daunting task where, you know, we spend a lot of time. We might end up transcribing only, you know, 15, 20 seconds of music for 2 hours of practicing. But remember what the goal is. It's to train the ear. It's to develop the ear. How much you do is secondary to the act of doing it itself. So I think also transcribing is very much like writing, right? Where, you know, if you take 6 months off of writing and you get back to write, you know, if you're writing a paper or something like that, it takes time to get back comfortable doing it. If you're writing every day, it's much easier. If you're transcribing every day, it will be much easier because you'll start comprehensively building transcription skills. I would say listen to the solo a lot and learn how to sing with it, or be able to sing the solo as you're transcribing. So if we get it in our ear, if we get it in our mind, we can pull it out through our instrument. Be realistic when assessing your success. 1 hour of transcribing could generate under a minute of transcribed music. Again, remember, the goal is to improve your ear. And this is a concept from one of my jazz teachers, Diego Rivera, and he said in our lessons, you know, style is more important than the notes. And you get these jazz musicians that play these awesome, like 16th note double time runs, and it's really hard to hear that. But if you say, I loved how Johnny Hodges was using his vibrato on this long tone, or, I captured this scoop that Johnny Hodges made in All of Me transcription, or, oh man, I love Dexter Gordon's vibrato. I really found like I got the essence of that. Or, you know, man, Coleman Hawkins, what a rich, dark sound. I'm going to try and capture that. That's, I think, sometimes as important to transcribing as just playing right or wrong notes from the solo. Then my next category for us today is applying theory knowledge. Jazz standards are basically functional tonality tunes where there's movement, you know, from a key center through a predominant to a dominant back to the key center. And we learn voice leading when we study J.S. Bach in our freshman and sophomore music theory classes. You know, we learn part writing. We learn this through our ear training courses. And if we can start, you know, transferring the concepts that we're learning in our music theory classes at the university, or that we learned in our music theory classes at the university, to our improvisation, our voice leading is going to improve dramatically, and we'll understand how to maneuver between different chords. Chord tones, when we're playing jazz, should correctly resolve. And, you know, thirds should resolve correctly, and sevenths should resolve correctly. So something that you can do is, you know, get some Oscar Peterson solos. All of them are wonderful because he's one of the masters at correctly using voice leading when he improvises. And just start to, you know, listen to how he moves between chord changes, how he moves how he resolves notes, and it's one of the best models out there for applying for modeling applied voice leading principles or improvisations. And then a great way to start just working on improvising is to play a guide tone line. And in the handout, I used an example of a guide tone line for just a simple blues, where the thirds resolve to sevenths and the sevenths move to thirds. And you can see how you can play a line um, through a blues. And as you begin to improvise, I would say be generous with yourself as you assess your jazz playing. We're not going to be Charlie Parker when we start playing jazz. We're not going to be Michael Brecker. It takes a long time to build skill sets, and it's something that's people. Jazz is music. I guess really all music is something that we take our whole life to develop and grow and try and master. And I think that's the beauty of studying music is there's no end point. There's always the ability to improve, to be stronger, to learn more, and that's one of the reasons that I love practicing jazz. And growing up, we had a video store in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. It was called Videoland, and they had a Duke Ellington concert from the late 1960s. And an interviewer asked Russell Procope, a clarinet player with the Ellington Orchestra, about playing Mood Indigo. And the question was, don't you ever get tired of playing Mood Indigo every night since you've been playing it since the 1920s? And Russell Procope was very thoughtful in his answer. And he said, well, no, because every time I play the note, I can do something a little bit different. I can, hold a note a little bit longer, inflect a note slightly different, and constantly, change my interpretation of the piece. And I mean, isn't that a great piece of knowledge for all of us to carry, where we can always be manipulating something to make it a little bit better, a little bit different? And I think that's a challenge for us as artists, is to say, how can I continually develop my artistry and change my artistry and be innovative with the way that I'm playing? And that transfers across to all kinds of music. But going back to starting to improvise, just simply doing it is a great measure for success. Improvising 3-4 days in a row is a great measure of success. Just doing, achieving, not worrying about being Charlie Parker right away is, I think, a wonderful gateway that's not as daunting as saying, oh, I have to play the right notes. Playing jazz music requires devotion and commitment, and it's a beautiful art form, and it's creative. And, I think we feel different when we improvise and communicate with others beyond the written page. And I think it's one of the most rewarding things that we can do is to be satisfied with an improvisation, regardless of even the quality of it. One thing that I would encourage you all to do is to begin with musical riffs. And a riff is a phrase that can be transferred across maybe like a 32-bar tune or a blues. An example of a riff is Centerpiece by Sweets Edison. And that's also uses a blues scale called a Kansas City pentatonic scale. So perhaps that's a great spot for you all to start even transcribing, is just learning that tune and playing that tune and then taking a riff. So when you take a blues scale, if you use like the flat third, the fifth, and the seventh, and come up with some of those ideas, start repeating those and manipulating those, that's a way to start building these ideas of riffs, something that you can play over all of the blues. And my next point is, I think, one of the most important about improvising is we get wrapped up into the what notes do I play question and worrying about playing wrong notes, and we forget about the elements of music. And a great improvisation has phrasing, dynamics, expression, rhythm, and I think these things can be just as important as playing a third on a chord or a seventh of a chord, because if we were wholly accurate with our music theory and all of our notes, but it lacks soul and empathy and heart and interest, well, then we're missing out on one of the reasons that we identify with jazz music. I would suggest applying licks that you've transcribed, and then find some friends to play music with. And I've got two students that are living together, Jacob Nance and Jeffrey Stevenson. They compose tunes, they play jazz together, they play pop music together, and one of the most important things we do as artists is we find collaborators. And that's where saxophone quartets are wonderful. That's where jazz combos are wonderful. That's where, going to the university and having a system of collaborators in place is so very, very wonderful. But I would just say, find other people to embark on this journey with you and play jazz as well. Now, the next part of the handout that I have are some resources. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but I think it's a really wonderful place to start. Learn a Charlie Parker solo every week this summer. Get the Omni book and study him and play along with him. It's a way to learn bebop vocabulary. The Patterns for Jazz is fantastic for the what do I play over chords question. Jerry Bergonzi has a terrific system of melodic development for maybe some more advanced players. So that's something that you all could check out. The Jamie Aebersold Volume 54 Maiden Voyage is a collection of easier jazz standards and tunes. It's a great embarkation point. Sorry, I get myself all goofed up here, but it's a great point to start improvising, playing simple tunes and blues. And one of the reasons I like the Jamie Aebersold play-alongs is that they're real humans making the backing tracks, not MIDI musicians or a computer algorithm. Greg Fishman is a Chicago-based jazz saxophonist. He's got wonderful materials. Adam Larson and Chad Leibowitz Brown are doing some tremendous pedagogical things online right now. I hope many of you are checking out what they're doing because it's really outstanding. The Charles McNeil website is a fantastic collection of transcriptions. And the YouTube Learn Jazz Standards and Play-Alongs is something that we use a lot at OU to work on jazz because they sound really good. And the iReal app is a must-have, so you have chord changes for everything that you're doing. And another resource that I'd encourage you to order is the Dexter Gordon transcription book that's available through Hal Leonard on Amazon or Sheet Music Plus. It's $15, and Dexter's a great place to learn time, tone, and swing feel. Now, my final category are some equipment options. And there's so many different mouthpieces and reeds and ligature concepts available out there to you that, just find something that you feel is good and works well. But I like the Van Doren V16 mouthpieces, the S7 for soprano, the A7 S Plus for alto, and I play both a T7 and a T8 based on whether I want a brighter sound or a darker sound on the tenor saxophone. So that's a tour through this handout. If I could offer you a summarization of just what I'm thinking, spend time this summer listening. Use YouTube, Pandora, Spotify to generate playlists for you. Check out what they're putting together. Spend time working on your scales, developing patterns, use some of these resources, and then find some solos that you like, some things you'd like to model, begin some transcribing. Think about the theory knowledge that you have and how that can apply to jazz playing and improvisation. And then just experiment and be happy trying. And, see what happens when you improvise. You might be in a better spot than you actually think that you are. And I think you just get a tremendous amount of joy working on developing jazz skills, learning more jazz skills over the summer, as we all might have more time as things have been canceled. So that's what I have prepared for today. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about anything else that you all might have if you want to make some comments right now before. Well, I hope I'm not seeing anything pop up. So I might just wrap up then. I'd like to again thank Nathan Nab for creating all of these online videos and a mechanism for us to share our thoughts. If you want to reach out over email or through Facebook ever and have any questions about jazz, please feel free to send that to me. If you'd like a copy of the PDF or weren't able to access it through the link that I shared, I'd be happy to send that out. Uh, Sorry, I see one comment. Oh, right, rhythmic. Thanks, Jeffrey, for writing that comment. Some rhythmic devices while improvising. I think it's a great comment, and we end up trapping ourselves into playing similar rhythms. So if you take a blues, give yourself some assignments. So maybe one time through the blues, you focus on syncopations or playing off the beat. Another chorus, you avoid playing on downbeats. Maybe another chorus, you say, hey, I'm going to play over a beat with a sustained tone. Also, maybe playing a mix of eighth notes and triplets or quarter note or triplets. Just sitting down and strategically setting out some ideas that you'd like to engage in, where you're saying, hey, I'm going to give myself this series of challenges to meet rhythmically. And then, looking at a Dexter Gordon solo and saying, okay, he used more eighth note motion here. Here's where he slowed time down a little bit. And analyzing how other players are using rhythm, but just going through and specifically practicing, saying, "Hey, I want to make sure I'm combining eighth notes and triplets, or I want to make sure I'm using syncopations, or chances are we forget to play long tones when we're improvising." And I think that's really important, is just to have some sustain or some break in the sound, or say, hey, I'm going to play 2-bar segments and leave 2 bars open. These are some of the strategies that I employ in my own practicing, just to try and increase my rhythmic variance. Or I don't know if we want to really even get creative, saying, hey, can I find a way to make quintuplets work? Something like that. So I hope that helps with that question, Jeffrey. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I do have a link to the handout. Let me get it for you all. Great. There's a link for the handout. Are there any more questions, or even just comments? Well, I really hope everybody takes some time this summer to work on jazz playing. I mean, this is a great way to, share ideas, share music, share joy um, with what we're doing, and just develop as artists and musicians. Well, and I'm thrilled so many people were able to join today as well. This is actually my first Facebook Live event that I've done, so it's great to be with you this afternoon, and just a joy to share some ideas. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the comment, buddy. I really, really appreciate it. One thing that I think our work online the past few weeks has shown us is that it's much easier to collaborate than we've even ever thought before, and use technology to your advantage to share ideas and share music, and people that live different places. As we're evolving as thinkers and artists, we can use technology to our advantage, like we're doing right now. Well, one final story that's just popping into my mind is one of the privileges that I had growing up. as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, was to live with a saxophone professor. He's also a great jazz pianist. So you might not know this about my father because he's master teacher, but he's also a world-class jazz pianist and classical pianist as well, and has just an impressive skill set. And he had both me and my brother out gigging when we were teenagers. And Jason was 13 years old playing bass, singing Frank Sinatra tunes. And, I was in the mid-teens at that time. And we got to go out and play wedding gigs and play society gigs, play at restaurants. And just looking back, I'm so very, very grateful and thankful for the opportunity to be working as a musician and really professional musician from a very early age. And just that learning by doing and listening and the experiences, that he created for my brother and I, and then we ended up creating for ourselves, was really, really fantastic. So, we generate our own market as saxophonists. We can create our own opportunities. And for all of us, I think that's what we really need to be thinking about right now is what are the opportunities that we can create online through technology? What's music going to look like in the future? And how can we share? And I think improvised music is going to be part of that. So I guess I'll leave us with that today. But thanks for joining me, everybody. And like I said, if you've got any questions or would like a PDF of the handout or anything like that, just drop me a line. So enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.